Hello students, now we'll discuss about TinyOS. Course outcome: on completion, students will be able to understand the operating system TinyOS. TinyOS. TinyOS aims at supporting sensor network applications on resource-constrained hardware platforms to ensure that an application code has an extremely small footprint. TinyOS chooses to have no file system, supports only static memory allocation, implements a simple task model, and provides minimal device and networking abstractions. To a certain extent, each TinyOS application is built into the operating system. Like many operating systems, TinyOS organizes components into layers. In addition to the layers, TinyOS has a unique component architecture and provides as a library a set of system software components. A component specification is independent of the component implementation. Although most components encapsulate software functionalities, some are just thin wrappers around hardware. This is the TinyOS architecture. An application typically developed in the Next language covered in the next section wires through components together with other application-specific components. Let us consider a TinyOS application. Example: field monitor, where all nodes in a sensor field periodically sense their temperature and photosensor readings to a base station via an ad hoc routing mechanism. A diagram of the field monitor application is shown in the above figure, where blocks represent TinyOS components and arrows represent function calls amongst them. They are actually the mapping of physical hardware such as I/O input-output devices, a radio transceiver, and sensors. Each component is mapped to a certain hardware abstraction. Synthetic hardware components are used to map the behavior of advanced hardware and often sit on the hardware abstraction components. TinyOS designs a hardware abstract component called the radio frequency module for the radio transceiver and a synthetic hardware component called radio byte, which handles data into or out of the underlying RFM. Advantages of TinyOS: it requires very little code and a small amount of data. Events are propagated quickly and the rate of posting a task and switching the corresponding context is very high. It enjoys efficient modularity. Thank you.